Welcome to Science versus Romance at Melbourne Writers Festival Digital. My name is Susie Anderson. I'm a Wergaya Wamba Wamba woman. I am employed by the Science Gallery of Melbourne, who is a partner on this event tonight, Science versus Romance. Tonight's event features 4 amazing Aboriginal women, and I acknowledge that each of us stand on the shoulders of elders from the fields we all respectively practice in. Aboriginal scientists, technologists, engineers, mathematicians, astrophysicists, as well as storytellers, culture people, knowledge holders, and everyone in between. I also acknowledge mob who have shared their stories at MWF so far, and for those still to come, for those communities you represent and the country you practice on. We are yarning alongside and with you. It's so special to share these stories to the world and with more access than ever before. I'm coming to you live tonight from the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I'm very excited to be presenting this event. It's all happening in live time. I just want to give a little context to this event, Science versus Romance, who Science Gallery is and why are we partnering with MWF. Well, Science Gallery Melbourne is all about those bits in between science and art. We're part of a global network of galleries, and we've been doing pop-ups in Melbourne since 2017, a couple of exhibitions like Blood, Perfection and Disposable. They've been taking place across the city and at Melbourne University, where our permanent home will open in 2021. And one of our favourite events that we've been doing over the past couple of years is a poetry slam. But like all responsible science citizens, we're committed to iteration and experimentation. So this year, we put the word out to some likely candidates that we wanted to create an exchange between the scientific and the literary worlds, a conversation of sorts, and thus science versus romance. So with me tonight, I have 4 excellent folks who are going to take up that challenge and present something that is in that collision between science and romance. The first duo that I am going to introduce this evening are Raelee Lancaster and Karlie Noon. Permit me to go on about their excellent achievements thus far. Raelee Lancaster is a Brisbane-based writer, collaborator and creative producer. Raelee was a recipient of a Copyright Agency First Nations Fellowship 2019 and awarded first place for the Nakata Brophy Prize for Young Indigenous Writers in 2018. Her writing has featured in Cordite Poetry Review, The Guardian, Overland, Lifted Brow and more. Raised on a Wabaka land, Raelee is descended from the Wiradjuri and Biripi peoples. With Raelee is Karlie Noon, a Gamilarey astrophysicist who is passionate about Indigenous astronomical knowledge and communicating science to those from a disadvantaged background. She was the first Indigenous female to obtain degrees in physics and mathematics, which were completed at the University of Newcastle in 2016. She's since completed a master's degree in astrophysics at Australian National University in 2019. Karlie was an ACT Young Australian of the Year 2019 finalist and a Eureka Prize Emerging Leader 2019 finalist. I'm just going to imagine that there's a roaring round of applause as we welcome Raelee and Karlie to share their response to Science versus Romance.
Space, humanity's final frontier. We have put man on the moon, sent probes to the furthest reaches of our solar system, and employed machines to go where no man has gone before. Until now, a new era of space exploration begins.
Uncles say, "Look to the stars, my girl, they show the way." He say, "When foul form in sky, their earthly kin are ripe the picking." Take what you need and leave the rest for the next. You say, ancestors build lessons into stars, play out our dreaming since time immemorial.
Welcome to the Mars Endeavour. Your mission is to be the first generation of intelligent life on Mars and to assist humanity in the colonization of the planet, making it a viable environment for many generations to come.
Uncles say ancestors fly for 1,000 lifetimes to nest in pockets of stars.
For generations, humanity has gazed up to the skies, wondering what could be, wondering if there's anyone out there. We have searched the skies for life, something that resembles us and tells us we are not alone. And it is now, in the new millennia, we have discovered we are alone. The future of humanity rests on your shoulders.
Uncles say stars are the roadmap to ever after. Lay maps with stick and sand. We are tethered to skies as we are tethered to land.
We are at a tipping point. Our humble ways have become unsustainable for one single planet to serve us alone.
He say, when emu fly, he fly high into the ancestors, stretched right across their thousands of years until his wings gave out and he flew no more.
You will face adversities no man has ever faced before, and encounter primitive life forms that do not have the capacity to understand the importance of your mission. It is vital. Nothing stands in your way, and you do everything you can to ensure the success of the mission. Humanity's survival depends on it.
Uncles say, now stars come to rest on shell-midden shores. He say, we welcome them with fish fresh and water warm.
In the preparation for human exploration of Mars, you will undergo an array of medical procedures to expedite the genetic adaptations required to endure the hostile environment of Mars.
They are thirsty, he say. They fly from thousands of years away.
You may have noticed you are currently being submerged in a viscous liquid. This is a silicon-based material designed to assist in the rapid regeneration of human cells. These rapid regeneration tanks are vital for your survival and must be occupied for the entire duration of travel.
Uncles say, come, Inu ancestors. You are welcome here. He say, you look weary, pale-faced and far too thin.
As we reach the Earth's outer atmosphere, you will begin being exposed to ionizing radiation. You will experience weakness, fatigue, fainting, confusion, bleeding from the nose, mouth, gums, and rectum.
Stay, Inu ancestors, rest and feast.
Bruising, skin burns, and open sores.
Then fly back your thousands of years.
The incoming ionizing radiation will in turn produce many free radicals within your cells, breaking your body down on the cellular level. The rapid regeneration tanks provide safety for all passengers, not only allowing for human body to repair itself, but also allowing rapid evolution to take place, replacing our old obsolete cells with stronger ones, better designed for hostile conditions.
Uncle say, look again to the stars, my girl. Say skies and seas and sand are same, but different.
Once on the surface, you will be required to drill into the inner regions of the planet using the equipment provided. In order to succeed, please drill at the designated locations only.
Say, we all have stars within us.
Once drilling is complete, a pneumatic valve will open. Gently place the bioagent into the valve. This step will ensure the erasure of all Martian life and provide the appropriate conditions for human habitation.
Uncle say, when stars come to roost, they cannot stay too long.
If conducted as instructed, there will be minimal harm to humans on the surface.
Uncle say they stay too long.
Shortly after, the pneumatic valve will open when safe for human travel.
Say they rest to points of restlessness.
It is now time to begin your journey.
Say these are not ancestor spirits. Say flesh and blood like you and me. Say same, but different.
Remember, there can be no cost too high, no road too rough to pay for the salvation of humanity.
Uncle say, look again to the stars, my girl.
It is now we take the biggest leap humankind, and indeed the universe, has ever seen.
The land around us cracks and crumbles. Look up.
Mars will sustain our way of life.
See, he say, how all the stars are gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Raelee and Karlie. There's a massive round of applause from all of us in Science versus Romance Green Room, and I'm sure everybody watching at home. Thank you for taking us on that intergalactic yet grounded journey as well. And I think the emu ancestors, particularly relevant as everybody watching at home will have the backdrop of the Cossack nebulae, fingers crossed, to the tech wizards, the Cossack nebulae or the emu in the sky as their background for this stream. And that's probably a good segue to Krystal de Napoli, who is our next speaker. Before I introduce Krystal, I just want to let everybody watching know that if you have any questions about the presentations this evening, the intersections of science and art, please send them through on the hashtag MWF Digital, and we'll try and get to them at the end where we'll sneak in a cheeky Q&A. But Krystal de Napoli is up next, and she is a Kamilaroi woman and astrophysics student at Monash Uni in Melbourne. Through her writing and public speaking, she advocates for Indigenous sciences and astronomy practices, writing about her own research and the role it plays in wider cultural conversations. She is the recent winner of the Monash University Faculty of Science 2020 Science Communication Award. Very well deserved. Krystal, welcome to Science versus Romance.
Thank you, Susie. For tonight's event, Science versus Romance, I'm meant to be here to put on my science hat and present an analytical account of some type of scientific topic I know. For an event that has drawn a line between the two fields and desires to see them merge, I find myself sitting on the fence between the two. For it is within my field of Indigenous science that these two ideals of science and of the arts, that I find they're tightly interlinked. For an oral culture whose knowledge systems have continued to thrive for approximately 100,000 years, story became the main vessel for information to transcend its time. In Indigenous science, we encode our observations, our hypotheses, and our conclusions into an oral tradition that can be remembered and passed along for thousands of generations. Most know these as dreaming stories. The nature of Indigenous knowledge systems is largely based on the idea of interconnectedness, where science, law, ceremony, and art are indivisible. Often, these oral traditions and knowledge systems are linked to astronomical observations, leading into this analogy that I'm fond of, where the night sky, it's like our library, where our books are the stars. And as long as we can see them, we can read them. And as such, it feels more appropriate to be taking off this scientific hat and instead embracing Indigenous values to present where science and romance are one. I'm going to present the meeting point of the astrophysics that I study in academia with the interdisciplinary nature of Aboriginal astronomy. In my research, I've explored the interpretation of the Pleiades in Aboriginal astronomical traditions. The Pleiades is a star cluster Messier 45, which is otherwise known as the Seven Sisters. The Pleiades contains more than 1,000 different stars, with only a fraction of them being easily visible to the naked eye. Depending on observation conditions, this may be around 6 to 8 stars. These stars are typically of B-type, which are a group of stars that are vastly larger and more luminous than our own G-type star, our Sun. The brightest member of the cluster is Alcyone, which has a luminosity that is around 2,000 times that of our Sun. The faintest of the 7 brightest stars is Pleione, which is only around 200 times brighter. The luminosity is not the apparent brightness according to our perspective here on Earth, but instead it's the true brightness of these objects. For Indigenous astronomers, the brightness of these stars has been a key area of focus for tens of thousands of years. After conducting a survey of hundreds of oral traditions, I found a consistency in stories from various Aboriginal nations which describe the Pleiades as 7 stars, with a reoccurring theme where one of these stars will either come to be damaged, dimmed, removed, and even often returned. These oral traditions that describe unfortunate events befalling a single Pleiad, or Pleiades star, can be grouped by themes. For example, it is often described that the Pleiades exist as 7 girls or women, where one of the group will be either attacked or killed. Often, that star that is killed is described as that obscure Pleiad, which is a descriptor that has piqued my interest. Another theme is the idea of shame, impacting the intensity of one of those stars. There are traditions which describe the Pleiades as a group of 7 exceedingly beautiful women called Miai Miai, where the smaller sister Guri Guri has a defective appearance and chooses to hide behind her sisters. Similarly, a Gamilaroi tradition in which a tribal man by the name of Runa spies on a group of 7 sisters results in the kidnapping of 2 of them to become his wives. Eventually, they escape. However, one of the women remains shaken by the experience and chooses to hide behind her sisters. Her name is Gil Gil, which means frightened or ashamed. The theme of one of the sisters being kidnapped and later returned is the most prevalent theme from those oral traditions. In one of these stories, the sisters are described as being composed of icicles. When the ancestor of fire kidnapped 2 of the young women, he attempted to warm their icy bodies with his flame. Instead, he only decreases their intensity and extinguishes his own fire. They return to their other sisters in the sky, but they no longer shine as bright. These traditions are among many more examples which cover the removal and return of one of the stars of the Pleiades. The focus on the obscure Pleiad, with the accompanying descriptions that indicate the apparent dimming and returning of this object, causes me to consider whether there is a physical cause for this commonality, and whether these stories may all be focusing on that same one star, the faintest of the 7 sisters, the most obscure of the sisters, which is Pleione. The Aboriginal astronomical traditions of the Pleiades make reference to the obscure or dimmest of the 7 sisters, possibly having luminosity variations. Pleione is not only the dimmest and most obscure of the visible 7 sisters, but it also has peculiar trends in its light curve. A light curve is the plot of a star's luminosity over time. For stars like our Sun, its luminosity remains consistent over timescales of millions of years. But for a subgroup of stars called variable stars, their luminosity varies on scales noticeable to the human eye and over periods of time that may amount to days or even decades. Pleione is a luminous variable star that is known to have long-term photometric variations of around 34 to 35 years. Pleione can vary on a scale approximately 0.4 magnitudes over this long-term period. To be detectable by the naked eye, the variations in luminosity of a variable star need to be greater than 0.1 magnitude. This means that Pleione's photometric variations are well within the limit to be detected by the human eye. My conclusion so far is that it is plausible that these astronomical traditions are describing variable star observations from the Pleiades. And that is my science piece.
Thank you, Krystal. To respond to your piece is Kirli Saunders. Kirli Saunders, I just need to pull up your bio. One moment, please. Kirli Saunders is a proud Gunai woman and an award-winning international children's author and poet, as well as a teacher and emerging artist. Her debut picture book, The Incredible Freedom Machines, was shortlisted for the Prime Minister's Literary Awards and CBCA Notables. Her poetry collection, Kindred, was shortlisted for the ABIA 2020 Book Awards and FAB Booktopia Awards. She is the inaugural winner of the Daisy Utamura Award and University of Canberra ATSI Poetry Prize 2019. Kirli is also the 2020 New South Wales Aboriginal Woman of the Year. And we're so thrilled that she could be with us tonight to respond to Krystal's throwdown from science.
Didgeridoo, thank you. And Wideo, hello everyone. Nya acknowledge Mirani Gananugang, Gadigal Madung Borengeling Yangu, Didgeridoo Ganai, Yuen Ganangara, Birapai Gadigal Borengeling for our Yorwang Bui. So I'm on Gadigal lands tonight, and I send my deep thanks and appreciation to the ancestors of this country. I've spent my afternoon out in the water, which has been beautiful, a little cold, and yeah, dreaming about this event, and yeah, what a beautiful thing to be a part of. Thank you so much. When I received the outline of Krystal's research, I just kind of fangirled on the couch for a couple of hours, as I'm sure everybody did just then. And then I called my auntie. I called Auntie Trish, who taught me the Gundungurra language that I just acknowledged country in. So thank you, Auntie, for sharing these stories with me. And likewise, thank you to all of our aunties and beyond for holding our stories. And it's such a joy to be able to touch on some of them tonight through, astrophysics research and also through storytelling. It's really special. So I called Auntie Trish. Auntie, can you tell us the Seven Sisters dreaming story on Gundungurra lands? And she said, well, Bub, I'm in a rush, but I'll summarize it for you. And back home, the story goes that when the sun comes down, then when grandfather's sun goes down, the sisters jump up into the sky, but one of them stays home. She chooses to stay home. And I wasn't sure if it was shame or fear or being prosecuted or any of those other, awful things. But I like to think that she's just choosing to stay home, like all of us during COVID. And at the same time as hearing this story, I was also welcoming a beautiful new Birria baby into our family. And we also had his totem, the Gugabara, arriving to us frequently in the lead up to this baby's birth. And so I asked Auntie, can you tell me about this Gugabara? Why is he constantly around, And she said, oh, well, if that's their totem, then the Gugabara sings up grandfather's son, Nabung Bunyo. He will also put him to bed at night, put the grandfather's son to bed. And I thought, oh, there's some synergy there. Sun coming down, these stars jumping up into the sky. And then this Kookaburra is also helping us to stay on the lighter side of things, which I think is really important while we're all choosing to stay home and be safe. So I'll read my poem for you now, which kind of weaves together those multiple storylines. But I just, thanks so much for tuning in. It's such a joy to be able to yarn from home during COVID. So this poem is called Gugabara Jera Biri, which means Kookaburra Star Baby, and it's with gratitude to Auntie Trish Levitt for always sharing stories. On the day of our new arrival, I call Auntie to tell her about the Gugabara who have sung our Biri in with laughing songs. Those same birds banded in blue, she tells me, have roused grandfather's son and laid him to sleep each day for all times. Those same birds remind us to always see the brighter side. They roost as old grandfather's son, wise and warm, returns to camp. And when he does, Aunt says, we can see the 7 sisters as they leap from Mother Earth to Father Sky, except one who chooses to stay behind, down here with us all. I wonder about this grounded luminosity, with magnitude marred by staying here. I imagine her at peace with her landing, picture her dimming and glowing as the others flow into distant realms, calm as she knows that all she loves will soon return. When Gugabara sound and our old grandfather begins to rise high into the sky and the variable lights of the night find their place back home, and the Biri, who were once Gugabara, that called Jera back, are returned to earthy arms of their own. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kirli. And I can really feel the interconnected nature of your piece to Krystal's research. And I think that epitomizes what the intention was for Science versus Romance. So thank you for really running with the brief. And I do just want to acknowledge that for Karlie and for Krystal, this was, they were definitely a duck out of water, fish out of water, whatever the phrase is. This is a poetry reading, so it could be either, but acknowledge their efforts and for being excellent sports coming along on this ride, and to Raelee and Kirli for sharing this evening. But we're just going to flip over now for a couple of minutes to pick up on some of those themes that we've discussed, particularly around the validating of Aboriginal science as it relates to the Western tradition, because I think Krystal's piece picked up on it, reflecting on language and story, and we sort of heard that interplay imagine in Karlie and Raelee's piece. So maybe, Krystal, if you wouldn't mind, I'll flick to you to just, if you wouldn't mind, just sort of a reflection on how you found navigating the Western science spaces, or bringing your passion for Aboriginal astronomy into those spaces.
It's been an interesting experience, particularly because I guess most people who I'm introducing to this knowledge has come from a pretty heavily Western biased background when it comes to science. I don't even want to say the comments that I heard after my first talks, and they weren't even people trying to offend me. They were people who were, trying to be very enthusiastic about learning about these topics, and just, you can just see with the language I use how it comes across, how lesser than they see it. And so for me, it's been a mixture of people who take it on board. They see what has come out of this field and what's been said by elders and researchers, and they don't need anything else. They take that at face value, which is what you need. But for a lot of other people, it feels like there needs to be a bit more work when trying to prove that Indigenous science is a valid form of science, and that oral traditions are a valid form of observation and recording data. So it's been something that's been a little bit interesting or tricky to navigate, but it doesn't really matter to me personally, because a lot of this information as well. Like we have an oral tradition, we have this information, it's fascinating, but we also, it's a beautiful thing about science, right, is that it's consistent. And so majority of these stories we can just like fact check by, you know, geological and astronomical records and being like, yeah, that lines up, and like it happens for pretty much everything that we explore. And so it's just, I think it gets to a point where it's sort of like, why are we still like questioning whether this is a valid form of science? And I probably just gone on a beautiful little rant there, because that's not even what I intended to say when I first thought of this topic. But especially just like hearing, I guess like the poetry version of talking about these variable star ideas. And I remember this was one of the topics that was so like heavily challenged by people when it came out, that yes, Indigenous Australians have observed variable stars, which was something that's relatively recent in Western astronomy. And yet we have oral traditions that go back thousands of years that can record them. And it's something that requires a careful eye too. So it's at the same time proving not only the longevity of oral traditions, but also the fact that you can take careful observations over long amounts of time and be accurate and be able to communicate that using something that is so different from what Western astronomers use. So it's just fantastic. I'm feeling like really inspired to just once and for all repeat again that Indigenous science is completely valid, and I'm looking forward to continuing to prove it.
Hear, hear. I think we all completely agree with you on that. We're all nodding along, particularly Karlie, who obviously sort of navigating the same fields that you are. Karlie, do you want to chime in on that topic? Because I know you sort of have spoken a little earlier about different perspectives in having different perspectives in the kind of scientific community and how that might add value.
Yeah, so really there's not a great deal to add onto what Krystal was saying. I think she really made such beautiful points there. I think for us as Indigenous people navigating this space, we're kind of past the point of proving it or trying to prove it to anyone, or, you know, any of that thing or type of work that maybe others expect from us. I think what I really gained from not only knowing traditional knowledge and knowing cultural knowledge that, you know, is appropriate for me to know, but then being able to share that with people, what that really does for me, and I hope for others, is that it shows science, however you want to define that, science and knowledge itself can come in many different forms, and it can come from different ways and different practices of finding that knowledge and information. And what that knowledge and information is heavily determined by value systems as well. And so, you know, we can come to it with different value systems. And ultimately, we're looking at the same things. We're looking at the same sky, the same world, the same universe. But there are different ways to do it. And different ways have different benefits and different pros and cons. And they all have their pros and cons, including Western science. And so I think what this does is it shows that even science can hugely benefit from different perspectives. And this is with any knowledge, you know, it hugely benefits from looking at it a little bit differently. And I think that really speaks to why it's so important to have different people in science, different, you know, people that aren't male, people who are Aboriginal, you know, people who come from a disadvantaged background, whatever it is, just having people in this space, this space that really does drive a lot of societal change, a lot of our progression. It's so important to have all of our values represented in that space. And have everyone at the table with the direction in which we're going in. And I really hope that the work, you know, I was really honoured to work with Raelee on this. She's opened up a whole new world for me in terms of thinking about things and writing and also expression. So I hope, what that piece does for people listening is really show you the difference in values and the different outcomes that can come from that.
Yeah, I think that Australia at large has really had to rethink their understanding of Indigenous scientific knowledge of country. As we've all seen, Dark Emu, the take-up of the knowledge shared of country and agriculture and aquaculture has really rocked a lot of people in our society. So hopefully looking to the stars for knowledge will have a similar effect to Dark Emu. But as you mentioned, Raelee is an excellent collaborator. I've had the pleasure myself of close contact with Raelee. That sounds stranger than I meant, but like super above board, everybody. But yeah, Raelee is an excellent poet and creative producer, and I can imagine this process must have been really enriching. And Raelee, I just wonder, I know you said that you really like sci-fi, but thinking about astronomy and kind of the sciences, what was your initial reaction to this prompt?
Yeah, so I love like science communication in the way that you can take scientific fact and then tell it in a really accessible way. And this whole process has really helped me like I guess like engage in that a lot more. Like this whole process, like in our first meeting, Karlie like spoke about how Venus had like become so hot that it like burnt like its atmosphere, and I was just like, what, that's wild, and like wrote this entire poem about it. And like it wasn't relevant to this project, but like I was just like, this is my sort of jumping off point into this sort of area, and that was really good. And also like Karlie like gave me some excellent feedback, and she was also receptive to feedback, and so we like worked really well to sort of like weave together our two stories, and so I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the interplay that Krystal and Kirli kind of experienced as well. I mean, I hope I'm not kind of overstepping the mark by suggesting that. But actually, hearing you speak, Raelee, I have my own poem about Jupiter and Venus, and when because sometimes they're really close in the sky. I mean, I'm looking at the astronomers for validation here, but I think it's like a really rare phenomenon. And I have this poem about, I just remembered that now. But it's the night sky is so inspiring, and to have proximity to some people with incredible knowledge of it, we love. But Kirli, I think something that I noticed with your piece is that language there's a lot of strength in language coming from you, and we can see how there's interplay between the oral storytelling of our cultures and what is reflected in the night sky. So did you find that language was your entry point into this piece as well?
I did love reading all of the stories in Krystal's research, and everybody should go and read it. It's amazing. But I guess the thing that I found really curious while I was reading was that the stars, as they're generally spoken about in the Western world, obviously don't give these sisters their black names. And I would really love for both of you to go and rename our stars with some First Nations language words across, particular to each of the different countries and languages. And I'm sure that the names for those stars already exist in languages Krystal mentioned. So that was something that came up. The Gundungurra word for star is Jera. And I think it's a really pretty word, Jera. And Biri for baby. So yeah, that kind of double R sounds really pretty. But yeah, language conservation is something I've been passionate about mostly in my sort of early 20s when I started my own language learning journey, and something that I'm still on. Susie and I were sort of chatting about that in the green room, that these journeys don't start or stop. For me, it's lots of calls to Auntie Trish and Auntie, what's the word for this thing? And can you tell me, some more of the elders at home as well, Auntie Valmore K, can you tell me some of the language words for these things or the dreaming stories for those things? And I feel really lucky that I get to have those conversations now, particularly as an adult, because as a young person I didn't have access to them, with my mum being raised as a state ward in children's home and colonisation affecting sort of that continuation of culture. And I think that's one thing that I'd really love to see, having read Krystal's her research and had that access to that multitude of stories from multiple countries. It really got me thinking, how many of our kids are sitting with elders and hearing those dreaming stories about the sky and learning the language word for that constellation, or the word for star for the Jera. What opportunities can we make sure provided? How many more poems about Venus do we need to get kids learning language in our dreaming stories? That's one thing that really became apparent for me in this project.
Yeah, I think more of these collaborations and emphasis on that interplay between our disciplines will only go on to strengthen Indigenous cultures across the country. We can only hope. Look, everybody, I think I might wrap it up here, unless anybody had any kind of closing remarks they wanted to make about science, romance, something in between.
I'm such a chatterbox, and I'm sure that, like, Karlie, I think, like, our eyes lit up at the same time, especially with, like, Kirli's recommendation of trying to incorporate Indigenous language more into the field, because genuinely today, there was the announcement. I see it through Dr. Dwayne Harmacher, who I know is working on the working group of the International Astronomical Union, who assigns global official names to different astronomical objects. And I know that 5 asteroids today have been named after Aboriginal elders. And
yes,
different groups, and always want to jump like this. There are a number of stars that have been awarded globally, have been awarded Aboriginal names. And I think it's fantastic that you're starting to see that representation, because obviously we hear so many like Greek and Arabic names for a lot of these stars, and particularly as astronomers, this is what we're exposed to. But obviously we know that all these different Indigenous cultures right around the world have, long histories of looking up at the stars and making sense of it. And so it's fantastic that this is something that's being actively worked upon at the moment to correct. And to anyone who doesn't know, because I'm surprised how many people don't know this whenever I do actually do talks, but the 5th star of the Southern Cross, so the littlest star, what is it, Epsilon Crucis, its name is actually Guinan. It's a waterman name. And so officially around the world, if you were to, someone in Brazil, America would search up what is the official name for this star within this constellation, it is a waterman name. And Guinan means like a dilly bag of knowledge. And that buys into the actual tradition for that group with that star. So yeah, hopefully it's something that'll keep going, but that working group's fantastic. And I know a lot of it is actually pioneered by Dr. Dwayne Harmacher. So fingers crossed we keep going.
Krystal, you are a dilly bag of knowledge. Yeah, that was amazing.
Very well said.
Brilliant.
Do you have anything from your own dilly bag to pull out before we close?
Oh, I don't. I think that's the most, spectacular way to finish. How exciting to know that, that the old people who have taught us the stories of our stars and who become those stars are finally, they're finally having their names given to them.
Yeah, I think I tried to scribble down a quote from Raelee and Karlie's prezzo, which said, "We all have stars within us." And with that, I think we'll sign off from Science versus Romance, a Melbourne Writers' Festival with Krystal Napoli, Kirli Saunders, Karlie Noon, Raelee Lancaster. I was your host, Susie Anderson, and we wish you a very wonderful evening and a beautiful Melbourne Writers' Festival. Goodbye.